On this week's episode of the podcast, we are joined by Christine Hernandez, whose mission in this world is to help people live bold in their relationships, bodies, businesses, and in life. She has found this is only possible if we address the pain, conflict, and challenge head-on, paired with extreme grace and love. She has been called the Queen of Conflict, and she loves to help others embrace conflict because the result can be life-changing. Christine is the owner of Revenue Tribe, a local Denver business, where she stops at nothing to help clients succeed because she's on a mission to show people that anything is possible and that they can transform undesirable challenges into powerful opportunities. Throughout Christine's life, she has turned the seemingly impossible into the possible by shifting her mindset, including overcoming a terminal brain condition. And it was during this time that she courageously decided to choose her life over her diagnosis and was able to fully heal from the condition. If Christine's message resonates with you today, please don't hesitate to reach out to her on LinkedIn or on Instagram. Those links are in the show notes below. Without further delay, let's get into today's episode with Christine Hernandez. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm honored to be joined by Christine Hernandez, an 8-wing 7 sexual subtype just like myself. How are you today?
I am great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. You're at work. It's a Saturday, which thank you so very much for taking the time out of your day to join me. It's pretty typical for an 8 to work on a Saturday. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, probably. I don't want to admit to that, but yes, I think I work probably most Saturday mornings.
Mm-hmm. I did too. When I first began my personal training business, I had hours of operation on Saturday from 8 to noon. And then I was able to have that full day and a half off of work until I started up again on Monday morning at 9 a.m.
Yeah, that's kind of typical for the industry too. Do you not do that anymore? Has that changed?
No, I choose not to work weekends anymore unless a client needs to reschedule. As an 8, I was go pushing my own personal limits in my professional life as well for so many years. And then I discovered boundaries.
Yeah, I'm back on the journey of that because I just bought this company. So I feel like there's a ramp up phase, right? When you just launch something. But I've taken Saturdays off until May when I bought the company, probably for 5 years. So I feel like there's a good balance when we do find boundaries. And I feel like as 8s, at least for myself, I hate that word. I'm like, slow down, and boundaries are too you want to take me off, use those words. Tell me to slow down or put a boundary in place. And I'm like, zip it. Just don't even.
That's hilarious. I'm all about boundaries, which is one of the reasons why I love the Enneagram so much, is because we can show up even as the same personality type, same wing, same subtype. We can show up completely different because of our past stories and because of where we think we're heading. So before we get into your story, which business are you talking about? Because you've created and done and sold and bought and all the things in your professional life. Which business are you referring to today?
I am referring to what was formerly Revenue Tribe, and now is called the Bold Leader Collective. I just purchased it from the founder, Nora Abel, in May. So yes.
Nora was an early client of mine in my business.
Yes, I know. You guys go way back. So it's so fun to see how all her people are still in the game, and we're really keeping the heart of the company that way. So I love that.
Yeah, Denver can be a really small town as well. And are you from Denver? Let's get a little backstory on who you are.
Yes, I was born in Denver, raised most of my life in Denver, spent summers in France because my dad's actually from France. And a little bit, just quite a bit of time in Europe, but I've always had my home base in Denver. So yep, I'm a lover of Colorado, love the mountains. I would like to be at the beach in Florida, but my husband hates the heat, so we're here.
Right. Okay. So normally I like to ask people how they discovered the Enneagram. And when we were getting to know each other a little bit better, you started to share a story about when the challenger personality type was most likely solidified for you. Let's start there, and then we'll work our way forward. How's that sound?
yeah, just going for it. I don't get a chance to share this story too much anymore because I used to all the time because I was doing a lot of outreach in the teen mom sector. But in business, it doesn't come up too much. So I'm excited to share. But I had my daughter, I actually got pregnant at 14, just right before I turned 15, had my daughter at 15. And yeah, I was actually, hopefully it's okay that I share this, but I was given the option in my home to either have an abortion or get out. And so I very simply at 14 years old said, okay, that's not an option for me. I've actually chose this. Like I made the decision to have sex young, and I have to like really own up to my decisions and take responsibility. I just remember even at 14 years old being like, no, that's actually not an option. And so I packed my things. My dad didn't even know. And I moved in with my daughter's dad, and his parents got home and I was moved in, and it was a thing. So my story started really young. And I was actually already, I was very competitive at the time in modeling and dance. And so I was already almost graduated high school. It was my goal to graduate so I could travel for my career and start early. So it actually worked out really well because I was able to graduate college by the time I was 17. And that's kind of where it started.
Right. It sounds like a story of against all odds.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of odds. There was a lot of odds, and a lot of it was so good. But I think for the challenger, I don't know what I probably would have categorized myself as a 7 before that experience because I loved parties, I loved decorating, I loved fashion. Like I was an enthusiast at heart. And then I think that's probably where maybe I was a 7 wing 8. And then in that moment, it was like, head on, let's go. I have to really own up to this and kind of take a fight stance, I would say.
Right. Right. I totally understand what you're saying because when you have that much responsibility, you can't escape from it any longer. And that's a tendency of the 7. And I hear what you're saying when the 8 almost like took over, it flipped.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's almost been like my 7 consistently gets me in trouble. It can almost be like well,
Still.
okay, really? Yeah. Like sometimes I'm like, with money and that kind of stuff, I love boutiques. So I'll go into a boutique and I'm like, my enthusiast just comes out, or chocolate, like I'm like, let's go. And that's kind of an 8 thing too, actually. So maybe that's still the 8, but yeah, it can
Oh
still get me in
yeah.
trouble.
Yeah, you're onto something here that I relate to a lot because the 8s lust after intensity. And that's a
Yep.
key word there when you talk about chocolate or experiences or being the best at. We lust after that
Oh yeah,
intensity in our lives.
for sure.
So you were doing a lot of outreach for teen moms, and uh, let's pick up the story from there where you graduated college at 17 and you started your first business at 20. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, so I actually purchased my first home a couple days before I turned 17. I couldn't actually sign the papers until I turned 18. And it wasn't I think the thing that a lot of people assume is like I had a bunch of supports, but I didn't. Like we did have some supports, but it wasn't a fairy tale. It looked really great from the outside looking in. But I actually at 17, I was kicked over a balcony and almost lost my life to domestic violence. And I had to like really pick up from there and completely start over because I lost the house, I lost everything. And through that divorce, I did get like a small settlement from the house being sold and that kind of thing. And so I was able to launch my first business, which was a child care center. I originally had went to school to be a teacher, and I'm highly dyslexic, and not a lot of people know that about me, but I struggled really, really bad in school. And that's part of the reason why I was like, I'm done. I want to start my career. I want to get out of this like box that's literally choking me out. Because I just don't learn like a lot of people. I just have a very different learning style. And so I went to school for child development. I think probably because my teen mom like situation had a ton of passion about understanding life and psychology. And then I did my major in education. I lasted 6 months in the education system and said, nope, this is not, I can't make any changes here.
Right.
And so I launched my first business at 20. And it was amazing. It was so great. It was like everything that I had ever wanted to do. We had an all organic menu, still do, it's still going. And it was just everything. We did dance classes and basketball and so many really amazing learning techniques. Because I was like, no child left behind in the school districts isn't really working. So let's prepare kids before they actually get into the school system. So that was the business I launched. And then sadly it was taken, or I had to sell it 6 years, like 6.5 years after I started it, because I was diagnosed with a terminal brain condition. And so I sold it, and it was kind of my ticket to healing in a lot of alternative ways. And that's kind of where that transitioned, and I was given a new path.
Yeah, expand on what you mean by a ticket to your healing.
It just gave me, because of the investment, because of the sell of the business, I was able to really take a year off. Well, it was supposed to be sell my business so I could basically pass away. But I was trying everything. I basically told the doctor, F you, like, I'm done. I'm not gonna listen anymore. These steroids. I was a bodybuilder when I got sick. I wouldn't say healthy, but I was very fit. I almost went pro. I was pushing my body very hard. And then come to find out, like, my organs were shutting down because I literally was at almost a 14% body fat percentage, which is extremely unhealthy, as you know, as for a woman. And I was pushing myself. I was on steroids. I was taking HGH, giving myself injections every day before I got pregnant. Like, I was pushing myself to the limit. And then I got pregnant, and I obviously came off a lot of steroids and stuff, but I was still working out. And then I started having a lot of issues and migraines, and then my eyesight started going in and out. So we found out of the diagnosis. It's called chiari, malformation. And I had stage 4. So it's basically your brain falling out of your head. So it's not cancer. I didn't have cancer or anything like that, but my cerebellum was being squashed and squishing my spinal cord. So it's losing all, mobility, eyesight, all of those things. And so I took time off to try to find another way to get healed. I did everything from hyperbaric chamber, acupuncture, like literally you name it, I tried it. Like, I was in appointments 7 days a week, constantly trying to figure out what was going to release. And it was painful. I was in so much pain. And then I had someone give me a declaration to say over myself, and a prayer basically to say, and every time I felt pain. And I started saying that, and all of a sudden it shifted. Like, my eyesight started to come back, mobility started to be easier. So there's so much to be said about mindset. And that's actually how I kind of got interested about the mindset work that I do now. It led me into this. So that was a long answer, sorry. But that's the ticket. That's really what the ticket to healing looked like for me. But if I wouldn't have had that financial kind of cushion, there was no way. I spent, I think it was $130,000 in different practices to try to heal myself. And because I wasn't surgery, I only had a 5% chance of living if I would have had the surgery. And out of that, maybe a 30% chance that I wasn't going to be a vegetable.
Wow.
And I was like, nope, that can't be my story. I'm not going to agree with that. I'm not going to align with that. So
yeah, thank you for sharing. What time frame was this year off that you took after the sale of your business?
It was right away. I didn't even have eyesight when I signed the papers. Like, will still kind of choke me up, but I didn't even have eyesight to sign the papers. Like, I look at the sign at the signature, and it's so weird. It's like, it just brings me back to that moment. So it was really fast. We did a quick sell. Luckily, someone in business had told me to set up a exit strategy. And so it was all set up, and we were actually getting ready to launch our second location in Boulder. and we stopped the buy of the business or the building, and then my director took over for me. It just lit it. It was literally, it was like supernatural. Like
Right.
it was,
Seamlessly. Yeah.
yeah, so such a gift. So
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's incredible. I can't even imagine how hard that was to go through. And you're talking about your children's birth and your children's age. So how many kids do you have?
I have 3 kids. I have a 16-year-old, which is crazy. Um, and then I have a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. So I was pregnant with my youngest when I was diagnosed.
Right.
And I think that was the hardest part when I got sick, is I, had to write all the letters on their big days because I didn't know if I was going to make it to them, like their weddings and their graduations. I have letters to all of them that I wrote, or someone wrote for me, that I have, because I didn't know I was going to be there. So my daughter, like, starting to learn how to drive is like such a victory. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm here. Like, I made it to this milestone.
Wow. Yeah, I'm trying to understand better what your experience has been like. So, what is your relationship with facing death in that way?
It's interesting with COVID, with this, right? Everybody's panicking and like very, very fear, like everything's been fear-based, and it's been hard to stay out of that. But I would say it's such a gift to have an experience, and not everyone does. So I think it's hard because my story is somewhat unrelatable to many. But I think what I'd love for people to learn from my story is death is guaranteed. And the reason why, so I've had a lot of people ask me, then why did you fight? But I didn't feel like that was like my lowest point, was I'm like, damn it, I wasted my life. Like, I actually didn't do what I was set here to do. And I just knew that in my gut when I got the diagnosis. I'm like, no, 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 like, this can't be the end, because I haven't actually made the impact that I was called to make here. Like, I didn't feel like I had accomplished anything great. Like, I was having affairs. Like, my husband and I were in ruins just shortly before I got sick. And so I knew that it was like not my time. I was like, there's no way this is my time. But I feel like when you know it's your time, like my grandma just passed last year. We just celebrated her life celebration of a year. And she knew, like, I just feel like, but I think a lot of times we just conform to what doctors say, and we have to advocate for ourselves. Like, there's a voice inside that tells you it's not your time, and there's a voice that tells you it is, I feel like, and from my experience anyways. And it wasn't my time. So I'm not afraid of death. Like, that doesn't scare me. That's not why I fought. I'm afraid of not doing what's meant to be done while I'm on this earth. Like, I believe everyone has a destiny to fulfill. I believe everyone has an impact that they're supposed to make. And if we got intentional about making that impact, our world would not be in this place it's in. Like, very few, I won't say nobody, very few people are actually making the impact that they were put here to do and make.
Right.
So I honestly, like, I wish that people wouldn't fear death, because it's guaranteed. It's like taxes and death, right? Like, you have to just kind of move through that, not get over it, but move through that reality and make sense of it in your own way. And I don't think anyone really knows, like, where we go and all the things. Like, there's a lot of information you can find,
Right.
but I don't think that matters. I think it's about focusing on the life we have and embracing reality versus fighting it.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying about wishing that people would face death with a different perspective without fear. And I would say that the COVID experience for me has shown me how to face the death of the person that I thought I was, or the person that I used to be.
Yes.
So there's this metaphorical passing of, or shedding, or just moving on from the person that you thought that you were into that person you were destined to be. So if you could sum up what it is that you're meant to do, what would that be?
I think in a short summary, it's really to change people's perspectives. that's kind of the core of who I am. And like really teach people how to live the impossible. Like I've defeated and created the impossible so many times. And I feel like the world needs to know that at a larger
Mm.
level. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what I'm committed to bringing to the world is like, stop taking this diagnosis, this pregnancy, this divorce as your identity, and really take that information, turn your crisis into opportunity. So I would say that's more than anything at a core, that's what I'm like, I want to see that done on
Mm.
a scale that we've never seen before.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense to me. So I'm hearing you talk about challenging people to rethink.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. It's very hard for us to change the way that somebody looks at their life for their own perspective. And our tendency as eights is to challenge what other people say, think, and do
Mm-hmm.
from a loving place, like
Yes.
we only want the best for you.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. I think through the work that I do now, and I did, that was probably part of the biggest problem in my marriage, my current marriage, is because he's a loyalist and I'm a challenger. And I was constantly pushing him to change. He hates change. He's a loyalist. It scares him. He likes the security and safety. And I was constantly making him wrong for that versus utilizing it as my safety net because I love risk. And I think I was doing it from a place of frustration and not with love. And so shifting into that too for me has been so essential because it's like honesty plus love equals change and growth, but just challenge alone will never move as fast as it will if you pair it with love. We have to have honesty and love, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. And a 6 as a partner would be very grounding for the 8 because
Mm-hmm.
of that risk factor. Like I like to take risks as well. Um, you know, especially in the financial realm of like, yeah, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go after what I want. And like losing money to us, I mean, we're just going to shrug it off like you just did with you shrugged
Yeah.
your shoulders when I said that out loud. And without glossing over your relationship, because I'd love to talk about it, you own a business called Revenue Tribe, which is kind of an ironic direction for the 8 to go. Is that
Mm-hmm.
is that a part of a healing journey for you?
Oh yeah. Actually, we came to this work, gosh, it was almost 5 years ago in October. Um, we actually started working with Nora because I wanted my husband, I had already filed for divorce, but my husband would not sign the papers nor get out of my house. It was our house, but it was my house in the season. So I was like, get out, like we need to move on. And he wouldn't sign the papers and he refused to leave. And we had 3 kids, right? So we had to keep it somewhat kind and normal. So it was it was a great season. So someone told me, one of my friends told me, like, go see Nora. She's like the mystical elf in like the forest, is basically what they told. They were like, she will tell you if you're meant to be together. And I was like, all right, whatever. I'll do anything at this point. So I wasn't super into counseling and that kind of thing. Like I had tried it a lot because I have a lot of trauma in my background, but it never really, like, it would be good. And I'm like, okay, how long can I talk about these problems? Like, what are we going to do about it? Like, let's move forward. So it wasn't really my jam. And I think it's really good in seasons. But I was kind of through that season. I had like processed till I was red in the face. So I'm like, I need something else. So we went to see Nora and she's like, oh yeah, you'll know if you're supposed to be together or not by the end of this program. And I was like, done. Wrote her a check for like quite a few $1,000s. And I was like, I didn't even care at this point. I was like, whatever, let's go. So literally we started 2 days later. And in the program, that it really works on belief systems. That's really the core of what we do, is we focus on what are your belief systems and like, are they serving you or not? So we got in and I saw my limiting belief at a core and my husband's limiting belief at a core. And I was like, damn it, I'm the one in the wrong. Like, he's actually doing what's right and good for our family. And I'm not. Like, it was just this raw moment of, I have to take responsibility because now I know what's in the food. Like, I can't keep eating it.
Mm.
So it was just the worst moment to like realize that I was wrong. And I had affirmed his limiting belief very clearly for our entire marriage. So it set us on a really big healing journey, but it saved our marriage. The Enneagram and this work, literally, we would not be married. There's no way we would be married. And I would probably be on like my 5th marriage, knowing myself, if I wouldn't have found this information, because I would have just been making everyone wrong.
Mm.
It would have never been my fault. It would have always been everybody else's
Right.
fault. So yeah, it's given me such a different view on life and given me so much information about myself and how to actually step into the best version. Because I don't believe that the challenger is just meant to fight their whole life. And I think that's where I was.
Yeah, I certainly can relate to that path of growth of I'm it's not as if I'm giving up on the fight. I'm approaching it in a different way, you know? And what came up for me when you were sharing that is like, how long can we talk about these issues? Well, that's quintessential 8 language of like, how long am I going to have to be vulnerable?
Yep.
And then you were talking about, what is your core limiting belief that you were working on with Nora? And then what was your husband's core limiting belief that you were affirming?
So mine is, if I don't measure up, I'll be left behind. And and then his is, there is no good in me. And so
yeah, so when you were critical of him, that reaffirmed his self-limiting belief.
Oh yeah. And I was very critical. So critical.
So once you unraveled those core limiting beliefs and found the Enneagram, what was next for the two of you? Did it begin with forgiveness, or what did that look like for you two?
Yeah, I would say, gosh, we're like still on the journey. Like, it's definitely not always smooth sailing, but yeah, there was a lot of forgiveness. There was a lot of just honesty about where we had been. And, people are like, oh, cheating, like that's like a no-go. You can't get over that. I'm like, I don't know, everyone's meant to get over it, but you can. Like, that's actually not the truth, because I was the one that was not faithful. And we definitely have moved through that. And we help a lot of couples now, and mentor a lot of couples, because of that, because the transformation that we found with that. But yeah, forgiveness was huge. And then just like understanding how to have healthy dialogue and healthy conflict. I was on Clubhouse the other day and someone was talking about, is conflict healthy in relationships? And I'm like, of course it is. Like, it's essential. And there was so many people that had great points that it's not. And I'm like, man, it like made me really think. But at the end of the day, I don't think we can move forward if we're not having honest conversation, which most people would categorize as conflict, I think. So it's hot as how to like have that healthy dialogue without leaving or stepping out or being unfaithful or numbing in some way, right? Like, all those things are just a numb out, which is kind of a little bit more of my 7 wing, I would say.
Yeah.
And so we would just tap out. I'd be like, get out, you need to leave. And we just would never get anywhere before. But now we have the tools and the ability with the Enneagram and the limiting belief work and our belief work, that we go, okay, like, here's where I'm getting triggered. Here's where you're getting triggered. And like, we have to take responsibility of those triggers. Not, I think a lot of times, especially right now with all the trigger verbiage that's going around, it's like, you're triggering me. That's great information. You take care of that. That's not like, I can't make you feel a certain way. I can add to it, but it's usually based on an insecurity within ourselves that we're triggered. So it gave me the ability to not blame him for my triggers anymore and take responsibility and can take control over those. And so it's literally changed how we've done life together and how we've parented our kids, how we've led our businesses. Like, it's just, the Enneagram has changed every relationship I have. It's so amazing.
Yeah. Thank you very much for going deeper into that. I have so much coming up for me as you were sharing, because while I cannot relate to your traumatic brain injury, I can relate to the infidelity in your marriage. And in my first marriage, that was my responsibility to own.
Mm-hmm.
And we did try to work through it, you know, being married for 2 years, and then halfway through, I was unfaithful, and then we tried to work through it. And then, of course, our wounds and our triggers came up. And like you said, I heard in your share that you would be okay taking the risk of being divorced again.
Oh yeah.
And that was like something I related to a lot of, like, yeah, I'll take the risk as opposed to being here in this present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge shift for me, as you were describing how conflict can be healthy in a relationship and is a part of a healthy relationship as well. That's been an area of growth for me, peeling back those layers and why I'm not vulnerable, why I don't share what's happening in my own experience. And so there's just, thank you very much for sharing your story, because that brings up a lot for me in my past. And one thing that I'd love to expand on is the infidelity for some people is a deal breaker.
Mm-hmm.
Physical abuse for others is a deal breaker. And I can relate so much to how those both would be true, because it would be extremely vulnerable to try and repair a relationship after those.
Yeah.
And I applaud you for making the choice that was best for you in both situations. Most recently, the choice to take ownership over your own responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not easy. It's like, and I don't think there's a lot of people, I think, want a cookie cutter answer for these things. And there's no right or wrong. There's your answer. And I think that's what has been key for me. And that is you have to understand yourself and your ability to forgive, or your ability to not forgive, and understand where you want growth and in healing in those things. And then you have to understand also if someone's willing to do the work and change, because if both parties aren't invested, I think that's probably the deal breaker for me. Is I'm not going to just like drag somebody along. And my first husband, there was like, he was a drug addict, there was so many other issues that I had uncovered that I'm like, okay, we're like, this is not just an abuse, like losing your anger kind of situation. This is typically like not the person I want to be with. And I'm not going to raise my daughter in this situation, nor put myself here anymore. And I stayed way too long to like try to force it to work. And I think that probably has contributed to my need to leave and feel very trapped in this relationship. So my husband now, he's paid the price for my ex-husband's, trials and abuse, because I'm out the door, or have been, so fast. And so I think it's always about your growth and your healing journey, and where you're at in that, if you can actually apply yourself in that relationship, or if you need to separate, right? So thanks for sharing that. It's so vulnerable to share that you were the one that was unfaithful. I think that's probably part of my biggest shame. Like there's so many things that I could say are shameful in my life, but that's the core of it. That's like, I have so much shame there still to this day, that every time I share that story, I'm like, ugh, it's still a gut punch, right?
Yeah. And if it weren't, then we would have bigger problems to work through.
For sure. That's a great
right
point.
Yeah, if we have no remorse or guilt. I love that you bring up shame, because I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown and the differences between shame and guilt. If we have no remorse or guilt, then we have nothing motivating us to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love Brene Brown for that. Her work's so amazing. And shame can be so healthy to admit, but I think as challengers, it's almost like it's taken me a decade to actually come to the fact that I have shame in my life. I'm like, oh no, I'm good. I'm healed. I'm past that. I'm good. And I think part of understanding myself and the Enneagram has given me the power to actually own those weak spots, so that I can utilize them for me and utilize the pain and turn it into purpose, versus just like secretly have it like eating away at me.
Right.
Have you experienced that?
Yes, absolutely. When you were sharing it, it brought me back to moments in my life where shame was the motivation.
Mhm.
It wasn't guilt that motivated me to change. It was the shame that was like, I've got to move as far away from this emotion as I possibly can. And yeah, that might be my wing 7, escaping the feelings and not wanting to face them. But it's
Mhm.
also how vulnerable it's going to need to be in order for me to do that. So in the last 18 months, I would say that I have discovered more about the old version that needed to die,
Mhm.
and spent more time creating the new version of myself that can help me get to that destiny that I know is a part of my life. And I really value what you were sharing about like wanting to just bolt and leave and I'm out, because that was me. As an avoidantly attached person, attachment styles is my second favorite thing to talk about behind the Enneagram.
Same.
And as an avoidant, that is my tendency, is to just bolt. And in the future, this new version of myself is committed to not threatening to end the relationship as a tool to deal with conflict, or as
Mhm.
a way to avoid conflict. I'm just choosing not to do that. And then when faced with those deal breakers, I know instinctively and intuitively that this is a no-go. This is where I end. I don't want to say dealing with it, but this is where my boundary is.
Mhm.
I think that would be a better way to say it.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're like the same on like all the fronts. We're like the same. We It's so funny. But I think there's something so good. I always say it's like my spiritual emotional gym, right? Like when we know these things about ourselves, I always tell my clients like you're gonna have to go work that muscle. Like with your life's work as the Enneagram, mine's to be vulnerable, and it's like I just work that muscle all day and I've gotten so good at it. Like when we were preparing for this, you're like, is there any part of your story you're not comfortable sharing? I'm like, not really, because I've worked that muscle so much. But and not leaving is another one of those. It's almost like every time we get into a really bad place in our marriage, I'm like, I so want to say it. Like, I so want to hit that button of like eject. I just like want this eject button and like everything to like close up shop and just go away. But it's almost that emotional gym that I'm like, I am gonna do another rep. Like I'm just gonna stay in the game one more freaking rep because I'm not gonna let this weak muscle win. And it's almost I went from fighting with my husband and like making him the problem to really looking at the weak muscle emotionally and going, you don't get to win. Like we're gonna make you strong because it's good for us. And I think that it's taken the pressure off of my need to work out to the point of like basically death before, because I am emotionally working out, right? Like I'm like really focused right now on SQ and EQ versus really that physical health. It's kind of taken, I wouldn't say it's not important because it's extremely important to me, but it's not this like fight that I'm willing to like focus all my energy on because I'm comfortable in myself now, but it's really going, okay, I want to work these muscles emotionally and spiritually to get me to better results. And it's so fulfilling. I don't Have you
Mm-hmm.
experienced that? Like the fulfillment as a challenger you get from working those emotional and spiritual muscles?
Well, I would say that I approach it from a very intense place of like, I don't want to sound like a 3 because I want to be the best at spiritual
Yeah.
uh, intelligence or emotional, the quotient that you're talking about there. It's not about being the best. It's about going in as deep and as fast and as hard as I possibly can on whatever it is that I'm intensely lusting after in the moment. And which we could talk about ADD all day long on another day. But um, when we're strengthening that emotional rep, what I want to clarify is that we're not abandoning our sovereignty or our own
Mm-hmm.
needs in order to do that. When we are faced with an opportunity to set boundaries, this is another way to work out the emotional rep and to make that muscle stronger. Is like, here's my boundary. I've said it before. Here's my boundary. I'm going to say it one more time. Here's my boundary. Okay, now we have a different conversation because that boundary has been pushed quite a few times. And so those emotional reps along the way make us stronger to take the risk to do what's best for us.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think it's about having that as a, like, that's an important piece of it that you mentioned, because if we don't have that foundation built for honoring ourselves, we will just push to like, we'll push to ripping the muscle, right? In like a kind of a workout term, we'll push too far. And so that's such a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not about pushing past failure. It's not about damaging ourselves to work that, but it's about embracing and being aware and in our bodies when we're working these muscles and going after the growth. Because we're, as challengers, I feel like we almost love the rip muscles. We're like, did you see I ripped my muscle? Look at this. I have a wound. So that's important. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that reflection back, because it reminds me of our tendency to self-sacrifice, stand up for the little guy. And there's no greater little guy. There's no bigger little guy than a teen mom or somebody who has been diagnosed with a terminal illness, or someone who has been at rock bottom professionally and personally. And so I got your back, like if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call me.
Thanks. Yeah. It's interesting because we always need someone in our corner, right? And and like reflecting back to us too. I think that's something that I've learned and I didn't have. I remember sitting in the car with the diagnosis. And I was pregnant. I wasn't ready to tell my husband yet that his wife and soon to be mom of 3 was passing, potentially. And I just remember staring at the phone and I didn't have anyone to call. Like I literally didn't have anyone that this wasn't going to impact. I was either paying everyone that I would have called, or I was married to the only other person. I didn't have any supportive relationships that would not be completely changed by this information. And that was such a defining moment in my journey that I was like, if I live through this, I've got to build a support system that can support me like I support the rest of my world. So that's such a great point as well. It doesn't matter how strong you are, you always need someone in your corner.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I reached out to my men's group this past Wednesday. I was having a rough day. Just a lot of emotions and a lot of self-criticism show up for me as I was working through my day. And I knew I had a coaching call in the next 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And I needed support from the people that I'm not paying, that want to see me win, that are in my corner. And so I made a quick post. And it was like this release of all of that was built up for me just by typing it out to the men who love me, care about me, support me. And over the course of the next 3 days, I had 3 conversations with men in that group. And they're like, Dave, I got you. What do you need? Oh man, I'm here for you. I'm not here to fix it for you, because that's not what we're doing, but I'm just here to listen. Not impartial, but they are detached from what I choose to do with that share and choose to do with that conversation. There's nothing in it for them. And that's the support that we all need. And that's what I heard you describing as a need that you needed in that moment.
Yeah.
Have you found that sense?
Yeah, I think I have. I think I have a good sense of that. I mean, I have some amazing business mentors and spiritual mentors. I think it's interesting with those relationships. Like I've had the ability to really look at what each relationship's purpose is, and really, because it's almost like I feel like in some circumstances, Nora actually told me this early into the game, my mom wasn't wanting to watch the kids. And she's like, you have a whole community behind you waiting to support you. Why do you go to the one person that's going to say no? And I was like, that's a really great point. I was kind of mad. I was like, that's a stinging factor. But like, I think I've had to get really honest with what each relationship brings and the support that I need. But I would say that I don't have a lot of challengers in my life. Do you notice that? Do you have a lot of challenger friends?
I would say that through the podcast, I've met plenty that I would not have guessed were challengers. And
Oh.
the way that they show up in my life is either to challenge me to be better than who I am, or rub me the wrong way and teach me how not to do things. I'm sure that 12 years ago, my internship supervisor at DU was a challenger.
Mm-hmm.
And by learning how not to treat people, I then was able to take my internship program through my business, through the Metro State University internship supervisor role, and make that a different experience for the people that I mentor now. And then my first men's coach, I've shared this before on the podcast, that, I go in there pretty self-aware with a good grasp of the Enneagram, a lot of self-identity. I walk in the room and I'm like, hey guys, this is something I'm really passionate about. I'm passionate about the Enneagram and I'm an 8. And I was completely invalidated by the facilitator. And, I didn't make that about him for the first time in my life. I didn't choose the victim role. I was like, okay, what part can I own? Why do I want to escape from this confrontation right now? So I gave it another year. And I think that one of the last few times that I was in that group, he's like, oh yeah, I took this test called the Enneagram and I'm the 8 of all 8s. And it, instead of validating me, it invalidated my experience once again. And so that's how challengers show up in my life. This conversation and this experience has been like how challengers can inspire and grow together. I don't feel any of that confrontation, although I think we could handle conflict pretty well.
Yeah. I feel like it takes that self-awareness though, and that ability to also be like aware. This is something that, man, I'm like always working on. Like, I don't know that I'm super good at like understanding how people receive me always. I don't know if you felt that, like, or if you experienced that. Sometimes I'll say something and it's usually to my poor team. They like put up with so much. I love them to death. If you're listening, I love you. Thank you for putting up with me. But it's like, sometimes I'll say something in the midst of like a busy, right? You get busy and you just are in it and you like spout something off and it completely tears their heart out and you don't even, like, I don't even notice it. But I feel like I'm getting so hungry to have people to reflect those things back to me. And I feel like it's really helped me shift into the 2 more, because I'm like in a curious space of like, how are people receiving me versus like, you should probably just buck up. Like, can you just grow some? If you just grew some, then I wouldn't be offending you. Like, it's almost like I've had that impact in my past. And I feel like probably in the last like 4 years, going through a lot of this work in the Enneagram, I'm like, I'm really curious, how am I being received? And so I'll ask people like, how are you receiving that? And I feel like you have that too. I feel like you really care about, just from this conversation, you care about how people receive you. And you've probably experienced maybe a time or two that you've like offended someone because you're just like, boom. Have you experienced that?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I can come across very intense and very gruff and direct. And that's been a part of my growth experience of putting behind me the absolute disconnection with the other person of how what I just said is received. So oftentimes the 8 is stereotyped as like not giving a fuck about what other people think about them. And our path to growth is towards the 2 who cares nothing but about how people think of them.
Yeah. Oh,
and so it's this, it's this melding and blending of those 2, the fluidity of the Enneagram, where I still have my core 8 tendencies and I have a softer approach from the integration of the 2.
That is so good. I've never looked at it that way. That is brilliant. That is so brilliant, Dave. That's really good. Yeah, that is such the undertone of what happens. And I don't know, you can speak to this too, but I don't think I actually don't give a fuck. Like, I actually care too much and it eats me alive. I just would never let anyone see me sweat. Like, or
Mhm.
I'm better about that now, but I would say I still have a lot to grow. Like, people just don't see my pain because I'm like, I'm not, that's such a vulnerable place in the moment of like someone watching you care about what they think,
Mm.
right? Like when you
Mhm.
get those nasty comments on Facebook or social media and you're like, seriously, it's so hard to not let that stuff affect you, even as the aides. And I think we so play it off. I feel like that's almost like we so want that to be the reality, but I don't really, for me, it's not. Is that, how
Right.
do you feel about that?
Right. A couple of things come up for me, and I'll share a story that came up for me in the last couple of weeks about that. And first, I'll say that what I hear you describing is those walls that are built up around us to protect us. And when I started to understand how boundaries played a role in my life, those walls can still be there in the form of boundaries, because boundaries show people how to love us, and it shows people where the door is to access us. That door is
Mm-hmm.
not locked, but it's certainly access to what's behind the walls.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing that I'll speak to. And then the second is, I did receive a highly critical comment on social media that I sat with for a couple of days. I got curious and tried to engage the person in a curious conversation, as opposed to just like straight up getting defensive and going off the handle and putting those walls up. And I saw that it was getting progressively worse in a way that like a troll would normally want to engage and egg you on and try to get a reaction out of you. So I was attempting to stay grounded, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to stand up for myself in this moment. And the comment was something like, you have a lot of narcissistic traits and you need help. And I was like, okay, ask myself this question first. One, I don't really care about this person's opinion. They're a perfect stranger. And is there any truth to that? Well,
Mm-hmm.
the first thing I want to acknowledge, and I said this in a response, is the first thing I want to acknowledge is that you didn't call me a narcissist. So there is truth in the fact that I have narcissistic traits, because we all do. Just
Mm-hmm.
how bad are they? And so on a normal basis, I'm a 1 to a 2 on the narcissistic continuum. If I get to a 5, then I know that I'm slipping into stress of going towards the 5 and having all these things come up for me. And so instead of letting it go like you normally would want to with a troll or somebody who's negative on social media, don't put energy to it, because it's only going to feed their own narcissistic traits, right? I approached it from that lens of like, yes, I acknowledge I have narcissistic traits. And I also want to acknowledge in you that you didn't call me a narcissist right away, because that term gets thrown around way too much.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that you're a psychotherapist or a psychologist with a doctorate in order to diagnose me as a narcissist. So I don't have to get defensive there. And so I let down the walls a little bit. And by publicly sharing what my experience was when that comment came up, showed people where the door was. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to get a reaction from me just by a barrage of negative comments. You're going to get a response because I'm standing up for myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, did it stick to you? Because that's like, so that's a hard comment, right? Like when someone attacks almost our identity or like our emotional state. That's a, and oh my gosh, I could talk on
Our
that all day.
character. Yeah. Is that
Yes,
what you're leaning towards? Yeah.
yes, our character. Thank you. I was like not finding the word, but it's so hard when that happens. But none of it stuck to you. You're like, it's good.
It's just social media. And uh, in the comments later, I made a new connection out of it. He's going to be the next guest on the podcast, actually. And we both agree that if you're not getting negative comments, you're not passionate about enough about what you're doing. And that certainly clues us as eights into how vulnerable we are being.
Mm-hmm.
Are we receiving negative feedback? And
Oh yeah.
to your point of like, did it stick to me? If it had come from a person who was within my inner circle, I would be hurt by it. Because it was somebody outside my inner circle, I could not even carry with it and take it personally. Like, that's not about me.
Totally. Yeah, it's totally a difference when it's someone you care about. Like if a mentor or a client or something was to say that, it would totally feel different. Thanks for sharing that story. I think I took like a class a couple of weeks ago on social media. Someone I really respect. She might be a challenger. I don't know. Her name's Ruby, and her like Instagram is I am Ruby, but she's very controversial and I respect that. I don't really know I'm clear on all the topics to be that controversial and like really own my view on things. I'm like, I want to see what this is about. And a lot of the content that she gave was how to overcome those things that like really stick to you in social media. But it's what you said is so key, and I think it's been key in my journey overall, is it's not about you. Like that's been a defining and changing factor in how I take people's opinions and the things said, especially on social media. So that's such a good point. Thanks for sharing. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you so very much for that reflection back. And thanks for joining me today. I know your time's valuable. So if your message resonates with people, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
So find me on Instagram. I am theboldleader.co, or on our website at revenuetribe.com. But yeah, I'd love to connect and continue the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so very much for joining me, Christine. This was near the top of my list out of 200 plus episodes. One of my favorites.
Oh, thanks. This is so fun. I think I need more challengers in my life. So thanks, Dave.
I'm here for you. What a powerful message today from Christine Hernandez. I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I do. And if you're looking to connect with her, please do so on LinkedIn or Instagram. Those links are in the show notes below. If you're looking for a little extra support in your life right now, whether that be your fitness, nutrition, or personal growth goals, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on Instagram at Dave M. Glazer. You can also search The Challenger Podcast on any platform and find us and connect with us there. Until next week, this is Dave Glazer in Denver, Colorado, wishing you health and happiness wherever you're at in the world.